Hello students, I am Shubha Hiremat, Assistant Professor of English, Government First Grade College and PG Center, Dharwad. In this session, let us understand the life and works of William Wordsworth and Coleridge as romantic poets. Before understanding about the life and works of Wordsworth and Coleridge, we have already studied the historical background of Romantic Age and its characteristic features. Romantic poets are also known as 19th century poets or nature poets, mainly because they revolted against the poetic tradition of 18th century and turned to the nature. In 18th century, the neoclassical writers like Pope, Voltaire, John Dryden and Swift, so they tried to write poetry and it was based on classical themes and forms. They gave lot of importance to objectivity, simplicity, structure, etc. So romantic poets, they revolted against this kind of tradition and their poetry was based on imagination. They gave focus to emotions, originality and freedom in their poetry. For the sake of understanding, we can divide romantic poets into two groups. The first group, the first generation of romantic poets include William Wordsworth, S.T. Coleridge, Robert Southey and Walter Scott, whereas Lord Byron, Shelley and Keats come under second generation. William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth, who began romantic movement in English literature, was born at Cockermouth in Cumberland in the Lake District, England. He was born on April 1770 and his parents were John Wordsworth and Anne Wordsworth. He was the second of 5 children born to John and Anne, and he had one sister, Dorothy, who was also the poet and diarist, to whom he was close all his life. After the death of his mother in 1778, Wordsworth's father sent him to Hawkshead Grammar School, and in October 1787 he went to St. John's College, Cambridge. In 1787, Wordsworth made his debut as a writer and he published a sonnet in The European magazine. That same year, he began attending college and received his BA degree in 1791. He returned to Hawkshead for his first 2 summer holidays and often spent his holidays on walking tours. He visited places famous for the beauty of their landscape. In 1790, Wordsworth took a walking tour of France, during which he toured the Alps extensively and visited nearby areas of France, Switzerland and Italy. In November 1791, Wordsworth visited revolutionary France and became enthralled with the Republic movement. He fell in love with a French woman, Annette Vallon, with whom in 1792 gave birth to their child Caroline. But there was lack of money and Britain's tensions with France, which made him to return alone to England the next year. The circumstances of his return and his consequent behavior raised doubts as to his declared wish to marry Annette, but he supported her and his daughter as best he could in later life. The Reign of Terror estranged him from the Republican movement, and war between France and England prevented him from seeing Annette and Caroline again for several years. We all know that Romantic age in English literature began with the publication of Lyrical Ballads in 1798, which was epoch-making or manifesto of English Romantic criticism. It was experimental, and William Wordsworth developed close friendship with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, with whom he jointly published this collection of poems. The volume gave neither Wordsworth's nor Coleridge's name as author. One of Wordsworth's most famous poems, like Tintern Abbey, was published in the work along with Coleridge, The Rime of Ancient Mariner. The second edition, published in 1800, had only Wordsworth listed as the author and included a preface to the poems, which was augmented significantly in the 1802 edition. William Wordsworth and his sister Dorothy, along with Coleridge, travelled to Germany in the autumn of 1798. While Coleridge was intellectually stimulated by the trip, its main effect on Wordsworth was to produce homesickness. So, in 1799, Wordsworth moved to Grasmere in Lake District, and later in 1802 he married Mary Hutchinson. William Wordsworth became the poet laureate in 1843 until his death in 1850. His publication of poems, The Lyrical Ballads, with Coleridge, contains 23 poems, and in second edition he also included the famous preface, The Manifesto of English Romanticism. In this he elaborates his poetic theory, and the third edition of Lyrical Ballads was published in 1803 and fourth in 1805. Apart from Lyrical Ballads, William Wordsworth, his masterpiece is The Prelude, or the account of the growth of poet's mind. Poems in 2 volumes was published in 1807, including Ode, Intimations of Immortality from recollection of early childhood. Up to this point, Wordsworth was known publicly only for his ballads, and he hoped this collection would cement his reputation. In 1812, his family, including Dorothy, moved to Rydal Mount, Ambleside, and where he spent the rest of his life. Wordsworth is also known for his definition of poetry. He describes poetry as the spontaneous overflow of emotions recollected in tranquility. Poetry is not dependent upon rhetorical or literary devices, but is the free expression of poet's thought and feeling. According to Wordsworth, a poet should also be a teacher, and he must strive to reveal truth through an imaginative awareness of persons and things. He wants to communicate his ideas and emotions through a powerful recreation of the original experience. That is why, in Romantic age, they gave importance to originality and freedom of thought and feelings in their poems. In the last analysis, a poem re-stimulated past emotion in the reader and promoted learning by using pleasure as a vehicle. So, poetry should give us pleasure, and also it must teach something so that we can learn something out of reading poetry. So this was the theory of poetry according to Wordsworth. Another major Romantic poet who belonged to first generation of Romantic poetry is Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Coleridge, the 10th and last child of the Vicar of Autrey St. Mary near Devonshire, England, was born on October 21, 1772. After his father's death in 82, he was sent to Christ Hospital for schooling. He had an amazing memory and an eagerness to learn. However, he described his next 3 years of school as depressed, moping, friendless. In 1791, he entered Jesus College, Cambridge, England. Because of bad debts, Coleridge joined the 15th Light Dragoons, a British cavalry unit, in 1793. After his discharge in 94, he returned to Jesus College, but he left in December without completing a degree. The reason he left was because of his developing friendship with Robert Southey. Both were young men and interested in poetry. They shared same dislike for neoclassical tradition and were also radical in politics. Coleridge, like William Wordsworth, also influenced by French revolutionary ideals, and he planned with a friend a utopian commune-like society in Pennsylvania. In 1794, Coleridge married his friend's sister. Coleridge had pains caused by chronic rheumatism, and to alleviate that pain, doctors prescribed him opium, which later developed addiction to this drug, which plagued him until his death in 1834. The most influential event in Coleridge's career was his friendship with William Wordsworth and his wife Dorothy from 1796 to 1810. This friendship brought a joint publication with Wordsworth's Lyrical Ballads, a collection of 23 poems. The most famous of these was The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Coleridge. Later described the division of labor between two poets. Wordsworth was to give the charm of novelty to things of every day by awakening the mind's attention from the lethargy of custom and directing it to the loneliness and wonders of world before us, while Coleridge's endeavors should be directed to persons and characters supernatural or at least romantic. When he returned to England, he left poetry and dedicated himself to literary criticism. Main works of Coleridge: The Rime of Ancient Mariner, the first poem of the collection Lyrical Ballads, and later in 1816 he published Christabel, an uncompleted narrative poem. In 1816 he also published Kubla Khan, a fragment composed under the influence of opium, and in 1817 Biographia Literaria. It is a literary criticism and also contains autobiographical elements. The poems of Coleridge are less, but still they have extraordinary and supernatural elements. Coleridge's aim was to give them a semblance of truth. His style is archaic language, rich in sound devices, simple vocabulary. His main interest was to create power of imagination. But unlike Wordsworth, for him, nature was a source of consolation, a moral guide. But for Coleridge, he is not pantheist. He has strong Christian faith, and nature represents awareness of the presence of ideal in real. Poetry helps man to re-establish the original harmony between man and nature in order to rediscover the presence of God and to reconcile with Him. This was the major theme in the poems of Coleridge, and he liked to use supernatural creatures in his poems, like sea snakes, angels, which are presented as real as material things, although ordinary men cannot see them. Thus, the poetry of William Wordsworth and Coleridge have many insights into the romantic ideas, and they were the pioneers of romantic era in British literature. Their revolution was successful. Wordsworth was made poet laureate, whereas Coleridge became an influential literary critic. With this, I'll conclude my lecture, and in the next session, we will discuss the difference between the poetry of Wordsworth and Coleridge. Thank you.